Welcome to Event Marketing Redefined. It's awesome having everybody here today. As some of you can see, I am not in my office. I am at my home. Please excuse the sponge paint on the wall. I just bought this house. I did not paint my wall that color, but it is a actual sponge paint. But great to be here today. This is our fall kickoff. So really cool. First time we're ever going to do a panel. So bear with me. I'm going to do my absolute best, but very excited for it. Cool topic. And today I have Marley Finnegan. She is the founder of Purpose. And I have Al Mercuro. Al is a senior account director for Genesis Exhibits. And they are two people who know a lot about creating sustainable exhibit and event programs. Al, Marley, welcome. And thank you both for being here today. I really appreciate it.
No, thank you for the invite.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Awesome. So why don't we do this? Let's start with both of you just giving brief background, who you are, what you do, and kind of how you got into this subject matter. Al, let's start with you today.
Yeah, I've been in the exhibit business for 33 years, 30 with my current company. We design and build exhibits for trade shows. And over the years, one of the things that sort of got to me early on was, and it wasn't even due to sustainability, it made me think about sustainability though, was the build and burn issue in our industry. And the fact that a lot of companies, especially in Europe and Asia, will tend to build exhibits for one event. They do not want to ship it back. They do not want to store it between events. And these things get literally thrown into the landfill. And Europe has really changed in that respect over the years. They've gotten much better in that respect. They're not doing that anymore. But Asia still is. And I saw a picture in July that one of my friends sent me from a show in Shanghai. And literally the outside of the exhibit hall, the entire width of the exhibit hall, about 14 feet high, was a pile of exhibits being thrown away after the show. This is 2023. This is still going on. So that didn't make sense to me even 30 years ago. I mean, and I wasn't, like I said, wasn't thinking about sustainability, but it's really important that people look at that and look and rethink, how they decide to buy an exhibit or rent an exhibit or whatever that might be. So
awesome. Well, thanks for being here. Marley, how about you? Tell us about you.
Sure. I've been in the biz for 18 years. I've been on all sides of the supplier side in terms of catering, production, event design, venues, and really became obsessive around sustainability around 2018, although it was always on my radar. I launched my companies last year. So Purpose Sustainability Strategies, consulting for event agencies and internal teams as to how to scale sustainability organization-wide, both from the business case, event emissions understanding, and implementation recommendations. And then through that work, I realized there wasn't really a simple solution that catered to event hosts around measuring travel emissions, which is typically 70 to 90% of event emissions. So I created a calculator, essentially, that's a group travel calculator. It's called Purpose Net Zero, that's designed to manage and help event hosts really simplify that aspect of the emissions journey.
Very cool. We will talk a little bit and get into that calculator today and kind of what that does, how it's used. Let's start here. One of the things that we've done doing this podcast now for a little over a year and talking to a lot of event marketers and people in the trade show and event industry, sustainability has come up quite a bit. It has been a question. It has been a themed topic, whether it's in content that we run, questions that we ask, interviews that we do. People are coming and asking the question about sustainability in the sense that they're not really sure what to do, right? They're not really sure what to do, but they know they're either being asked or they're going to be asked. Al, we'll go back to you. Why do you think many event marketers and professionals, why do you think they find it challenging to prioritize sustainability? Or where do you think kind of that movement of up and down goes in terms of a priority?
Well, to give you some historic retrospect, back in the 2000s, it was a very hot topic. Most of the trade show managers, marketing people that I was dealing with, the companies that they worked for, it was a very strong part of their mission statement to find a vendor that does sustainable whatever. And what the problem was with sustainable exhibits back then, or exhibits that were built with recyclable materials, we were representing a company out of Michigan at the time that was one of the few companies that did that. And the problem was the price. The price was extremely high. And once the marketing people saw how much it cost to be sustainable, it was kind of thrown out the window and said, hey, we don't have to be that sustainable, I guess. Coming up to pre-COVID times 2019, the price really went down. It went down tremendously almost to the point where it's the same price as buying a normal build at this point. So ironically, I went back to some of those same marketing people and tried to reintroduce this subject, and they still weren't very much interested, most of the ones I spoke to. But who I found were interested were the sustainability directors and the purchasing directors of companies. They were interested in working with vendors that did those kind of things. So sometimes you have to kind of go outside the box a little bit and kind of find the right people that can kind of drive it back to the marketing people. And I had some success in doing that. So today, I think it's more, clients tend to be a little more shorthanded right now coming out of COVID, and they have so much on their plate, I think, of handling whatever they're handling at their end, that sustainable part of the business is probably not a priority on their list. Is just getting whatever they need to get to the event is more important on time.
Yeah. We talked a little bit before saying that essentially, like, I have felt like at the end of 22, we, personally, we're getting more questions about it. Like people asking about it, their program, could we put a report together for them to go back to leadership? But then once inflation started hitting, once the cost started truly rising, a little bit of the government money had kind of run out, then it started to dwindle away again. But I think, and as we get later on here, we'll start talking about small changes, kind of medium changes, large changes. I think that most people, regardless of the scenario, should be at least taking some small changes that they can go make and let their teams, let their executives know, like, hey, like from this side of things, we are operating, we're making progress. And then once it sort of becomes an initiative again, where it's important to everybody at the organization, they may have a chance to make some larger jumps, essentially. Marley, you want to hop in there?
Yeah, I think there was a study done by Morning Consultancy that essentially established that, almost 90% of everyone in the survey polled has a very deep awareness and intention around acting sustainably. But there's a huge educational disconnect between understanding what that actually means and what literally about sustainability concepts such as emissions, like how do they play into our lives, what are fossil fuels, and how do they intersect with our industries. So I don't think it's intentional. I think it's not been made obvious in our industry as to how to approach it. And honestly, like after 150 hours of certification, I came to the conclusion that there's 5 buckets of event-related emissions. It starts with travel, the biggest impact. The next thing is energy, followed up by sourcing, which includes materials and vendors, suppliers. And then it goes to food, and that encompasses food choices, food sourcing, food waste, and food donation, and then waste. So really everything that we do around events can be sort of bucketed into these categories, and having that understanding and knowledge can be a really helpful gauge as to how we start approaching things. So apart from that sort of disconnect, obviously, I talk a lot also about the business case, which I'll dive into further, but there's so much going on in the world around us. In the 1980s, there were $4 billion climate events a year worldwide, which means, a climate disaster that costs over $1 billion. This year to date in the US so far, there have been $23 billion climate events. So it's in our face. It's statistically, it's very much there, and it's affecting the financial markets. It's affecting, business in large ways. So I think it's something obviously that's much more a priority for business, and therefore it has to be a priority for event professionals too.
Just one more thing about that. Instead of being reliant on the client, I guess, coming to us with that kind of question or that need for sustainability, thanks to one of the positive things, I guess, from COVID, when we were shut down, gave me an opportunity to start getting more involved with other organizations out there and giving a little bit more of my time to get involved with them as well. Muse, which Marley and I are part of, is one of them. But I also got involved with the Sustainability Committee of the EDPA. And what I proposed to them beginning of this year, January, was that all exhibit houses just build things this way. Just let's not let the client decide which way we're going to go here. We need to be the drivers on this and get our industry to make exhibits from recycled materials. And then there's no question. This is what we're doing. This is what we're offering. Every exhibit house, hopefully, will be doing this, I hope, by the year 2035. We're in the midst right now of putting our sort of standardizations together within the committee. And it's going to be announced on November 30th at the EDPA Access event. So we're going to present it there. So it gives at least exhibit houses building exhibits a direction, finding the right vendors to work with, the right other partners they can work with. And again, with the price being driven down, it's just a natural way to go at this point, is just say, hey, this is what we're doing as an industry. There's no question now. This is the way we build things.
Yeah, I mean, I think making progress in these areas, it takes movements like that, right? To be able to use an organization like EDPA, which is a great organization. I will be there, right? So I'll be able to hear and be a part of that. I think, Marley, with what you said, I love how you broke it out: travel, energy, sourcing, food, and waste, right? So I'm just thinking from my standpoint, I understand from a trade show and event side, being a producer of those things and working with the end user on those. Energy, sourcing, food, and waste, I completely can see in my mind. Like I could, tell myself a story. Where are these little areas where individuals can kick in and make change, right? Because I've seen it happen, from materials to, the types of printing to rental program. There's a million ways, and we'll get to those. But what about travel? I'm curious about that. How do you hold a large third-party event, right, where everybody has to travel in? How do you minimize in that travel? Because I have to imagine that everybody getting on a plane and everybody taking Ubers and all that has to be a big factor.
Yeah, I mean, that's why, Coachella, over 80% of that festival's emissions is from travel. There's an international client that we've spoken to that has over 15,000 attendees, and 92% of their emissions are from travel. I mean, ultimately, it's the biggest thing that is, for sure, from a strategic perspective, you should be making sure that everyone that's coming, or, the price point is right, so that this is going to provide value to everybody involved. And also, you're essentially responsible for everyone's emissions that's coming to your event, is the way that it should be seen. And ultimately, that's not being scrutinized from a governmental or compliance perspective yet, but eventually it's most likely that it will be. But I created Purpose Net Zero to integrate with event registration software, so that the attendee, when they're registering, they can input just something as simple as their zip code and then the modes of transportation to get there. And then we calculate emissions to the dollars and cents associated with whatever dollar amount the event host wants to set per metric ton of carbon. Now, this is getting into a lot of very sustainable jargon here, but this is basically essentially what I help with. And we kind of provide what I call a carbon concierge service to help people understand, what does all this mean? What can we put our money to if we're going to fund the offsets relative to our carbon footprint for travel? And essentially, we don't mark up carbon. We don't get in the middle of people paying for carbon action. I don't believe in that. But essentially, I help people connect with reputable organizations that have carbon offsetting programs that they get certified for and have documentation to support their action. The carbon offset market has been highly scrutinized due to some bad actors. And, it's definitely something that has, even in the sustainability community, a lot of opinions. But currently, the way I look at it is, right now, really very few people are measuring their travel. And in order for us as an industry to be conscious of what our emissions are, travel is the biggest emission. So how do we adapt to that? We start measuring that. We start doing something conscious about it, is really the reason why we created this solution, but also to make it easier on event hosts, so they're not having to spend a bunch of time with data management and calculation on their own, when they already have so much going on.
Yeah, I mean, I would think maybe something like more localized events where you have multiple versus just one, making it easier. Like if you have 4 versus 1 in Los Angeles, you have 4, not a little smaller, people can travel, could be 1. But at the end of the day, I just keep thinking, like, the travel's inevitable if you're going to hold these events. It's just a part of what the events are, but kind of that offset nature for an event. If you can say, hey, we have this many people coming from all these different places, how can we be more sustainable in our actions through energy, sourcing, food, and waste to kind of lower that number? I guess it's almost like gamifying it.
Yeah, a hub and spoke model with multiple locations is always a really great idea. So the tool, the way that it can work in the future is essentially once we have a data set from a group of attendees for one event, if it's something that you have year after year, basically we measured for a group in Dubai and about 60% of attendees were from North America, 40% were Asia Pacific and Europe. And we were able to tell by just using that same group of people's origins that if they had the event in New York City, it would have been 50% fewer emissions than traveling to Dubai. So those are the types of emissions friendly futures that we can forecast with the solution. If it's not something that historically is always happening in the same location, if you want to get creative around where to have it, you can pick really, green energy focused convention centers or locations that have a lot of sustainable solutions already. So it can help with that as well.
Gotcha. We have a question here from Phil. Phil says, do you think it's an awareness issue too? Do people still have the mindset that it's more expensive to be sustainable, much like what's happening between electric vehicles versus gas vehicles? So I'll let Al, Marley, you guys can fight over who answers it. But I would say the vehicle thing is interesting because of the cost is coming down. It's almost, you can get a electrical vehicle for the same price as any other. You know what I mean? So it's an interesting point, Phil.
I think it's a misconception. I mean, yes, there are obviously, I think generally speaking, when you're being conscious about consumption and you're consuming less or buying less or being more strategic with the elements that you're actually using, if you're using things that are more circular and thinking more about the life cycle, sourcing locally, I mean, it definitely, a lot of this falls on suppliers, which is what I talk about a lot in what my work is, behavior change through RFI and RFP language of the procurement of, the different vast element of your event. But ultimately, even something as simple and small as changing from a beef menu to vegetarian menu can unlock enough of a budgetary savings to incorporate something like composting into your event. So not everything is actually adding costs. Some of it is actually taking away costs if you're able to, drive that behavior change.
Awesome.
Also,
go ahead, Al.
I think it's contingent on us as people in the industry to bring it to the attention of our clients. As I mentioned before, some of them, it's not top of mind, but it's maybe our job to currently what I'm doing right now is I'm sending a email to some of my client lists with the subject matter as what are you doing in 2024 to be more sustainable at your events? And that has gotten the conversation started. It was not maybe part of what they were looking to have a conversation on, but it at least got them to contact me and say, oh, what's this all about? We this is something we should be looking at. And it's up to us to educate them and to bring it up to them. These are the things you need to do and kind of make them aware of what we're doing within the industry to make it better for them sustainably. And again, it's never going to be top of mind, I think, of most of our clients, but I think we need to bring it to the top of the list.
I also think I was around in the industry in 2008. The pandemic was such a psychological shock to the industry that so many people were questioning whether they even had a job, if they were going to get paid, how the rest of their career was going to play out. So I feel like when we came back, there was such a state of grateful reactivity where we're just like happy to take all the business rather than sort of an innovative, proactive strategy. And that's where sustainability kind of unfortunately got shifted maybe into the back seat, whereas really the future of business is sustainable. The future of events is sustainable. In 5 years from now, I think all events will be sustainable. And whether that's legislated or compliance is a different question. But yeah, to Al's point, I think it's an industry-wide thing that needs to be paid the utmost attention to for the success of really a business to exist 10 years from now.
All right, let's talk some small changes. Let's talk two parts. Let's break it up into two. One, because Al and I are in the trade show business, let's talk exhibitors, right? Because you have event marketers that are running exhibit programs. They're also running host events and their own events as well. So let's break it up into those two. If you're running an exhibit program or you're running host events, right? You have your own event schedule and field marketing. What are some small changes or maybe things that people are already doing that is pushing them in the right direction that they can continue to do, they can document that they're doing? What are these small changes that people are probably doing or that they could be making?
I think some folks are still The little things, if we want to talk about little things, literature. Years ago, people bought tons of literature to an event. Not only does it cost money to print it, it costs money to ship it, it costs money for drayage fees, for handling fees. And most of the time, they don't use it. All of what they brought at the show, it's a waste, it has to be shipped back. Clients end up throwing it away before they even leave the hotel. So that mindset has changed somewhat over the last few years, where
And the QR codes is a good way around it, right?
that's making a comeback, I feel, the QR codes.
Yep.
And not only for that, it relates to also premium items. There's a big discussion about premium giveaways. What's more important? It has to be something that has to be perceived as a value, and it has to be related to what you do when you do a premium. But someone just presented to me last week a QR code way of getting premiums to people so that it's not something they're going to throw away again at the hotel before they leave on the plane. Again, it still has to be something of value. Example I often give my clients is cheap pens. If you bring 3,000 cheap pens and they break right away and they get thrown into the garbage. One of our clients actually came up with an idea of, they had 25 key accounts they wanted to meet at the show, and they wanted to get them into their booth. So they bought 25 really expensive pens, and they sent the top of the pen to the client prior to the show to say, hey, come to booth number 516 and pick up the rest of the pen and they had an opportunity then to meet all 25 of those accounts. And they were able to obviously do some business with those folks. And it was something of value that those people perceived as a valuable item, as opposed to a cheap pen. So it's that rethinking of what's important and what's of value, I think, that people need to have when they think about what they're planning for a show.
I think with what you just said there, Al, is on the topic of the giveaways. I'm a firm believer in kind of the strategy where they said, hey, we have 25 key accounts we want to meet. Even if you don't know, like, just bringing a bunch of crap to hand out doesn't really do anybody any good, right? Why not have things that you're giving away, like you're saying, that are more meaningful, that are more significant? You could give away a weekend trip, right? You could give away a gift certificate to a restaurant. You could give stuff away that people come in to raffle to win, where if you're going to talk to 1,000 people in a week at a trade show, have 20 really good giveaways that people have to queue in for, that they have to sign up for. There's ways around just having crap, because crap gets thrown away. Even nice things get tossed away. Just think about the lineage of what happens once it's gone. What about like renting versus purchasing exhibits for someone's exhibit program? I mean, I've always felt like renting is an obvious, sustainable option.
Well, I've been in the business 33 years, and renting has always been part of our mix and what we do. It was never, back in the 90s, I don't think it was ever thought of as being sustainable. It was just made economic sense. Again, gets back to that build and burn thing I mentioned before, is instead of throwing it away, why don't you rent it instead of, if you feel like you don't want to own something like that. So the renting is definitely something I think people have been doing for years. It's just they never thought of it being sustainable, but it's definitely part of the package of being sustainable.
I mean, one of the trends I've noticed over 12 years is, if you're going to purchase an exhibit, you should be using it for multiple years. And I'd say 3, 4, 5+ times a year. There are just people that just want to buy exhibits because of the ownership. They don't understand renting. They just want to own an exhibit. I have seen more companies buy exhibits and tell us, we're going to use it. We're going to use it. But they don't have these shows booked. They don't know if they're going to go exhibit, right? And what they do is they buy a brand new booth. They use it twice, never gets used again. I had exhibits that sat in our warehouse for years that we'd call people that they kept paying for storage on. I think renting is a huge sustainable option, and it's something that is also economically better for clients sometimes, or most of the time. And it is truly a sustainable option. I have frames that we've been renting for a decade. Things that we've been that's just constantly using. So when your exhibit's being built, it's not reinventing the wheel. There is no waste to it, but it's at least for the structure.
Yeah, I got a call about 6 years ago from a new client looking for a new booth, and they said they only go to one show every 3 years. The show they go to is every 3 years. So they said currently the exhibit house is storing the booth during the 3 years for them to use every 3 years. And I said, what do you mean storing? I said, this is the definition of a rental. This is what people should be doing to rent. And she said, they never presented that option to me. So again, goes back to our industry needs to be more proactive in doing the right thing for the client and what makes more sense for the client. I think people see that as a value. She bought into our program right away because of that. So they've been renting with us for the last 6 years. So they've done it twice since the show's every 3 years. So
smart. Marley, what about you? What do you think on the overall, like on the event side, whether it's with the, the organizers, the venues, or the people that are going, that are hosting their own events? I mean, what are small things that they may already be doing or that they could do?
So I tend to think a lot more macro than micro on that. And it's only because, between travel and energy, that's the biggest bulk of your emissions. If you're talking about sustainability within the event, that's a huge aspect, and measuring your energy for your venue, for your participation as an event planner and your travel is not actually that complex. And you can buy renewable energy certificates to neutralize your energetic footprint of sorts. I think ultimately there's so much opportunity to do small things. And, when we think of like the original OG thing for sustainability, I think most people were like, let's replace plastic, let's replace water bottles. And I think people psychologically go to the things that you see that are obvious, like waste, as the number one things to start with, when really those aren't the biggest emissions impacts. They are very important, and they're hugely important to brand reputation. But even like as if you're an exhibit house or you are a fabricator, changing your own energy within your facilities to be green energy, or, installing solar is in the long run going to be more helpful to your clients, because your emissions are associated with your clients in the long run. So I think it's also just kind of being able to identify those buckets of what your emissions are and starting there. I mean, thinking circular around fabrication and design and exhibits is the key. So just to your point around modular, reusable, rentals are incredible, and being able to get creative around how those can play a different role or use upcycled materials, or very hyper local in terms of where we're sourcing from, are all ways that, it depends on, I guess, the audience. But I think when we think about travel, we think about energy and we think about sourcing. Every event professional knows exactly what that means. But oftentimes I wonder if people are identifying that, fabricated, wood for your fabricated elements could be either coming from, the Amazon and the rainforest, or it could be coming from FSC certified, more local vendor. And those emissions are very drastically different.
Yeah. So I was actually going to bring up, I was going to say reusable materials, right? Reusable, recyclable. Tell me about those two terms for events, for trade shows.
Getting back to rentals, I mean, the one part of rental, and it's great to reuse the hardware, but the graphics were often considered not sustainable, and the fact that they would have to be thrown away in years ago if somebody was updating the marketing, whatever it might be. Obviously, simple things like don't dating things on a graphic can sometimes save the length of a graphic, so you're not dating it for that one event or purposing it for that one event. But I met the woman that runs Meet Green. I don't know if you're familiar with Meet Green. They're a company based out of Portland, Oregon that manages some shows. They manage the IMEX USA show that's coming up. Mm-hmm. And she mentioned to me last year, the president, that they found a way to take a lot of these destination graphics, the scenes from a lot of the destination shots that were used at the show, they found some senior citizens' homes locally that they were able to put these murals up in their common areas. I mean, it's just that out of the box, that rethinking, how can it be repurposed? How can it be reused? Rather than throw it away, she went out of her way to find a way to get those things used, that there was a purpose that somebody could get some benefit out of that rather than throwing away. Updating that a little bit from my work with the EDPA, we found a vendor now that will take printed graphics, even with SEG edging on it, and recycle that. So that can be recycled for repurposed for use on that. So even some graphics that are being produced today that we do are produced with plastic water bottles, made from plastic water bottles, which is another great way to reuse those water bottles to make the graphics we need to make. And then those graphics can be recycled. So it's a whole process.
Yep. I love the signage from plastic water bottles, from the ocean, that are infinitely recyclable. The hardware is reused. So it's not only cool. I did an event in April where it was 432 water bottles that made the step and repeat. And, we were able to talk about that in social media, and just like, obviously very, very cool. I see that there's a few questions popping up too.
Mel doesn't really have a question. Mel has more of a statement. I'm going to read it because I like Mel. Mel says, great discussion. He said, as an industry and as manufacturers, we need to do a better job educating salespeople, designers about sustainability, specifically green materials. We've done a poor job explaining how aluminum, regrind plastics, recycled foam, and fabric and FSC wood are widely available, and except for wood, usually cheaper and of equal quality. Yeah, Mel. I mean, it's a good point. I think that's what Al was saying earlier, is like, it has to start on our side rather than the clients coming to us. And I mean, I would say I'm definitely a victim of that. I'm kind of waiting for the client to ask and say, hey, this is an initiative. And what are we going to do? Right. So I couldn't agree more. David says, do you guys think buying carbon credits is a viable method for offsetting the environmental impact caused by air travel? If so, are there any organizations you could recommend?
Yeah, I think right now it's one of the best things that you can do as far as like the options that are out there, unless you really want to shift to something outside of offsetting like biodiversity or, like there's a lot of different ways to look at climate impact. So Gold Standard is an organization, patch.io. There's an organization called Climate Vault. Those are all reputable organizations that I like to work with around offsets. There's such a thing as carbon removal. It's more expensive. That's technically considered a 1-to-1 metric ton removal. So it's like a flight from Chicago to San Diego is 1 metric ton, and then you buy 1 metric ton of carbon removal, and theoretically they neutralize themselves. Carbon offsets don't have that same 1-to-1 metric. And basically there's just been scrutiny around the viability or like double dipping on these things. There's a John Oliver episode all about it. But at this point, given budgets, like carbon offsetting begins around $15 per metric ton. So imagine you have a client, flying round trip Chicago to San Diego. It's going to cost you $15 to offset that project. I think it's a misconception that it's very, very expensive to offset. A lot of events are in less than $10,000 in terms of their total, offset price, given the $15 per metric ton ratio. But it's ultimately the offsetting project, and the action should align with the organization's mission. It should align with the organization's intentions around impacts. There's a thing coming that's not necessarily honored in the sort of emissions management space yet, but there's a thing called insetting, which is essentially investing in your supply chain to help them become more sustainable, therefore eliminating emissions from your own business, which I love. I think insetting is like the future, because ultimately, if we're helping our supply chain be more sustainable, then it's helping us along the way. So sorry, that was a long answer, but
no, it's okay.
That's what I would say.
No, it was good. We have another question from Mandy. So Mandy actually asked this before. Mandy says, I'm currently working on increasing the sustainable practices around our exhibit program. I'm wondering if there are any examples of a sustainability report generated by other exhibitors or organizations supporting these initiatives. I have multiple data points illustrating the choices we're making and changes we're implementing, but I'm looking for inspiration on how to package that information so it can be shared with a broader audience. So Al, I'm going to ask you about this because I don't know if the EDPA has anything that you guys have seen or done. I actually emailed Mandy this morning and sent her a report that we had put together for one of our clients to kind of show her how we packaged it, which basically was pretty simple. It's just stating, this is what you've been doing. This is what is sustainable about what you've been doing. This is where you're doing a great job and we're doing a good job for you. This is where things could get better. And then these are the changes that we could make in the future and the options that you have. So that's kind of how we put it together for them. Al, I don't know if you guys at the EDPA have put anything together like that, or any kind of report has circulated for a client.
Well, that's a great initiative on your part to get that out to your client. But at the same time, that's part of the study that we're putting together, which will be announced at the end of November. We're working with Glenn Hansen. I don't know if you know him. He does a lot of these kind of reports for other organizations. And I'm sure he has some case study things that I can share. Potentially, I can ask him, see if I can share with your contact.
That would be great. Let's talk about some like medium to larger changes. What are like big change that needs to happen? My kind of thought is that it does stem from everybody inside of events. It's the venues, right? It's the organizers, it's the hosts, it's the corporate companies, it's the suppliers, it's us, it's the planners. I mean, it is everybody needs to make change. But what are some big initiatives that maybe need to happen, are in motion, or could happen?
I personally think scaling sustainability strategy organization wide and not making it a one-off thing or making one person aware. It's really about an organizational perspective shift and, having committees and having, encouraging innovation, encouraging ideas, encouraging change. Basically, it's about innovating and doing things differently. So I think committing to it as an organization, getting in front of regulation and the brand reputation piece is the real commitment, because this is again, I'm very bullish on it, but it's the future of business in our industry.
As you said, Matt, the show organizers, Karina Bauer from IMEX, for hiring Meet Green to get involved with their events. I mean, it just takes that kind of the out of the box thinking, like, well, how can we make this event better? And down to convention halls. I mean, they need to be more sustainable. The Javits is doing a wonderful job. There's another in Detroit, another convention hall in Detroit doing a wonderful job.
Yeah, Huntington Place.
Yep. And so again, they saw this years ago as something they needed to do. I mean, the Javits is doing tremendous amount of work. They have a farm on the top of their roof now on the new extension they built. So that's fantastic stuff that's going on. So
I agree. I think venues, hotels have a huge responsibility to commit to green energy. And that's the second biggest thing after travel, bar none. So, event planners, suppliers, your hands are really tied on that, other than buying renewable energy certificates to neutralize those emissions, which are part of what we help and we teach on. But ultimately, it really comes down to the destinations and the venues and the convention centers and the hotels' responsibilities to really manage that and start tackling that issue.
And carpeting has been a big issue at trade shows. A lot of waste, tremendous amount of waste for years went on with carpeting, where most of it got, even though you're renting it from the show contractor, it often got disposed after the event was over because of holes being cut into it for wiring, for electrical wiring. They did, over the years, have looked at it saying, if you have an island carpet of 20 by 20, they'll cut it into 10 by 10 sections. But there are companies out there now that are doing recycled carpeting. Yes. GES is working with one of them out of Atlanta, a company called Emerald, which is making recycled carpet for them. And they're taking care of the entire program for the show contractor. So it's just very enlightening to hear that there's all these different little companies out there doing things like this. And it just adds to the mix. Everyone has to jump on board for this to work.
I think when you're talking like large scale, even medium to large scale change, right? Essentially, one of the thoughts I just had is like, yes, there are different people in pockets doing things. I mean, even for example, like my company, we had a discussion. We're building new crates. We're trying to get creative on our crating to not just to be more sustainable, but also help reduce costs for our clients. But they kind of go hand in hand, because how many, trucks are we going to, if we could save a truck, right? I mean, we're being more sustainable going to a show. So everyone has these little bits and pieces, but I think a big scale change where we have to get thinking bigger. And my mentor, Dave Wallens, always says, think bigger, think bigger, think bigger. Right. And I mean, you got EDPA, IAEE, IMEX, exhibitor. I mean, I could go on and on and on about the number of associations in and around trade shows and events. You have travel associations, but they don't link up. They don't talk to one another. Like IAEE and EDPA are on two different planets, two totally different planets. Mm-hmm. So if there was to be large scale change for anything in the industry, and the industry has a ton of problems, let alone sustainability, those associations need to start to connect. They need to start getting their boards together. They need to start getting the people, say Al, like yourself, who's on a board at EDPA that's trying to make change, to say, hey, what is IAEE doing, right? What IMEX with Meet Green, right? These relationships, that's something that I think should probably be conversations inside of these associations, is to put some initiatives together that they're all working towards together versus separately.
Good point. You read my mind. One thing I failed to tell you before about the standardization program that we're coming up with, the DPA. I had learned that a fellow named Ben Wiglis from Informa in the UK had started a program about 2 years ago called Better Stands program. And he's basically doing the same thing over in Europe that we're trying to do here. So I had one of our committee folks meet with him at IMAX Frankfurt in May, and we're going to form like sort of a partnership to make this more of an international standard of building exhibits. So that's a great example of working together, because it's silly for us to both kind of do the same thing and not kind of share our ideas together, which is beneficial for everybody.
Yeah, you got to connect the dots, right? You got to get people doing the same thing. It's all relative to the same industry to a degree. It's just different pockets of that industry. Do either of you have any like real life examples that you've seen where you felt that there was actual like real impact made? People saw it, was sort of strategized and executed. Any real life examples you can share with everybody here?
I mean, I think it's hard to see sustainability work when you're when you're really focusing on some of these big impacts, but really selecting a venue that uses green energy saves 6 figures worth of emissions, or can save you 6 figures worth of emissions. You know, I kind of always go back to the same like bucketing in terms of impacts. But ultimately, like, I know IMAX, they have an amazing, they have one of the best exhibitor sort of sustainability guides. Ultimately, I think it's about leadership, sustainability strategy from the beginning, organization wide, and it's led by the event host. It's led with communication, procurement, behavior change. I guess Al's probably got way more specific examples than I do.
I have more negative stories, but I don't want to share those.
I have a few of those.
I mean, one example I can come up with is, again, when the price came down on the recycled materials building exhibits this way back in 2019, I had a new client that I just met with, and they were looking for a new exhibit. And that's one of the first questions I ask in my discovery is sustainability important to your company? And he was new. He was just hired as a marketing director. He was more concerned with just getting the exhibit. Again, wasn't top of his mind. But I said, well, this is my first example of trying to come up with, well, the prices come down now. Why are we even asking that question? Let's just produce the booth that way for him, which I did. And we delivered to the show, set it up, show happened. I asked him after the show how the show went. He said, fine. I said, by the way, I said, that booth was built with all recycled materials. He says, that's really wonderful to hear, because the owner of his company, who we didn't really know that well, was into sustainability big time. And it made him look like a hero when he went back to tell his boss, hey, that new exhibit we just bought was all made from recycled materials. So again, he wasn't caring about it at the beginning, but just by doing it, it mattered to him at that point.
There's just like a little bit of a disconnect in the sort of old style of thinking. I heard a story last week from someone that they were at a trade show, and basically the venue was trying to charge an exorbitant amount of money for a flat screen. The exhibitor went out and bought a flat screen for a couple $100 and then threw it in the trash right on the way out of the door. So like, to me, it's so much more about how we collaborate and how are we working together so that we can rent that flat screen from the venue and it's not being gouged and totally, that gives us a bad look when we have people exiting the building. And like Al, you said about, that exhibit hall just having, loads and loads and loads of straight to landfill trash. I mean, we have to do things differently, do things better, and not just because, we have control of this venue, should we be gouging people to the effect that we're throwing flat screens straight in the trash.
That's a great example of the AV companies not realizing the cost of monitors have come down so much that if they started renting them at a reasonable rate, most people wouldn't want to go out and buy their own. They would rent it. So you're forcing the exhibitor to kind of do what you just mentioned, is either give it away as a gift to one of their prospects after the show's over. Most of them not going to want to ship it back. Some will invest in an AV case, so they will use it again if they want to own their own AV at that point. One of my biggest things is shrink wrap. Not exactly on the same subject matter here, but it's just, if you think about the amount of plastic that's used to wrap pallets going into a show and out of a show, and that stuff just gets thrown away after it's just been unwrapped. it's mind-boggling how much waste of plastic is done in just shrink wrap alone. And it's not just
Well,
for
and
the
there's
event industry, it's for all industries. So there is a company out there now that's offering a very heavy duty kind of Velcro strap that straps around the pallet, and it's reusable. So it's not something that gets thrown away. And so we're test marketing using that in our warehouse right now to see how that works for us. So again, there's vendors out there doing some really, really nice things that I think could add to the mix here.
And to that point, Al, there's also bio-based plastic wrap, and it's not plastic. It's made from seaweed and various different bio-based, plant-based materials that are being developed currently. That right now the price and the scalability is not there to equal plastic by any means, but it's something that people should be looking into, can be looking into for things that where that Velcro solution doesn't necessarily work. And then the other thing is like the venue itself. There are specialty recyclers who recycle plastic wrap that doesn't have food contaminants on it. So this is trade shows, like all that plastic wrap really, it doesn't have food on it. It doesn't have anything that's prohibiting it from being recycled. So, but then the venue needs to take control of that waste stream and then do something productive with it.
All right. Question for you both. If you were giving advice to an event marketer running a trade show, an event program, what's like the two biggest things that you would tell them if they were saying, hey, I want to push this program in a direction to be more sustainable today and then in the future? What would be the advice you would give them? What's the direction you would point them in?
I mean, I would really tell them to go macro, get really familiar with what event emissions are and understand how all of your events really play into those factors and strategize from the very beginning on how to mitigate emissions around energy and travel up front. And then really all the rest, you really have to lean into your suppliers and you have to lean into procurement practices to both get their commitment to acting sustainably and sourcing responsibly and all those things, but then also contractually to follow up with providing you the information you need if you're going to measure emissions, all that data necessary to really fully bring the program through.
I think leaning into the suppliers is a big one there, Marley, that idea of saying, challenge your suppliers, challenge your partners, ask them, what can we do? How can you help? Who can you go to? What are the options out there for reusable, for recyclable, and the material side, the freight side? I mean, all of those things. Just asking the question, I think, starts the conversation.
Yeah, just as potentially as all these new clients are younger and younger out there, I think they need to think outside the box more, again, to be more educated, to use analytics that Marley provides to prove to their management this is a way of controlling their costs and also helping the environment at the same time.
Yeah, I like the idea of having something. Obviously, I think one of the biggest things plaguing our industry is a lack of data to be able to go back to leadership and say, hey, this is working, or this initiative is moving in the right direction. So any data, any sort of benchmarking that people can do, I mean, absolutely all for that, because I think you're starting to prove a case in the direction that you want to go and that things are going the right way.
Yeah, I'm part of the Experiential Marketing Measurement Coalition, and that I've just sort of joined up with them as a board member, but they're definitely creating sort of more tools for measurement in our industry, also including measurement around DEI. I'm going to be working on measurement around sustainability with them. So I agree. I think we need more data to support our efforts in all aspects.
If an event marketer does want to go and bring stuff to their leadership, right? Do you guys have anything specific that they should be bringing? Should they start somewhere, start small, then go big? If it's for an event, if it's for a trade show, doesn't matter. Any steps, any advice you'd give them in terms of steps to take in sort of delivering that to say, hey, this is the direction the program should go. Here's the baby steps. Here's this. And then here's kind of the big picture.
I mean, I think personally educating the C-suite as to what event emissions are and that these are in order of impacts. This is what it takes, how we're impacting, our own emissions goals and our sustainability goals. I think that that's truly the disconnect, is that most people don't understand event emissions and that they don't know where to begin. So providing that value and that understanding to give them, that credit and credibility would be my opinion. Also around, they know the business case. I think all the C-suite should know the business case, but it's a huge brand reputation point at this time. And then it obviously, if it's a publicly traded company, they're going to have compliance around reporting emissions. So being able to come with solutions around measuring travel emissions and measuring energy and measuring these factors will definitely be something that the chief sustainability officer will want to hear.
I have 2 lists that I send to my clients of like top 10 lists of things to do. I'll be happy to share that with anybody.
Let's run through the top 10 list. I think it's great. 10 ways to stay green when you exhibit. Is this the one you're talking about?
That's the one. Yep. Choosing a long-lasting, reusable modular stand. Again, not doing a build and burn kind of thing, and trying to reuse the booths for multiple usage over a period of years is I think elementary in doing this. Having it for multiple shows, which is what we just discussed. Carpeting, which we discussed a little bit about before. We talked a little bit about the certified wood for crates that need to be made that way, but also for if you're building a booth out of wood itself, which is not done as much anymore.
And that's with
LED
the FSC,
lighting,
right, Al? When it
yes.
comes from the wood.
That's
so if anybody has to
Forward
ask about that.
Stewardship's Council. Yep.
Okay.
LED lighting, which has been sort of everyone's kind of gravitated not back to, but using that as opposed to the incandescent lights and even the fluorescent lights that were used for years. Getting down to adhesives used, paints that are being used. We talked about the brochures, the literature, waste that people do there. And promoting your green credentials and spread word about sustainability. It all goes back to, I think, more and more people, that if they hear about it, I think they'll start thinking about it more. So
nice. Let's finish on that. Al, Marley, it was great having you both. Great talking about this topic. Everybody that showed up, thank you, as always, for stopping by. This is the first of the fall tailgate tour. So thanks for coming by. Thanks for listening to us. Al, Marley, you guys were great. Keep up the great work. And thank you so much for being here. Ish is going to put your guys' contact in the chat. For everybody who's remaining, I think you can find both Al and Marley on LinkedIn. And we will make some introductions after this for some of we'll call them action items from today's call. Marley, Al, thank you both so much.
Oh, thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Here.